Hello everyone, greetings from the Servant of Nero, AJ here, and this one's going to be rather short as there isn't much to talk about. Well, actually, that's not quite true, but the subject of the day isn't particularly well covered compared to the races with notable presence in War Machine and Hordes, mostly because it isn't playable in the main game in any way, shape or form. The race about to be discussed is part of the RPG, though only as legendary bosses from the 3.5 ed days for the most part. And they are the, drumroll please, the Giants. This will endeavour to cover essentially every major detail about them that is officially published, and while some information may be missing, there won't be that much that is omitted herein, which is a pity because it'd be nice if there was more lore concerning the giants and other species not well known in Immoren. Again, there won't be that much by way of artwork, mostly because so little of it exists. In fact, there are only a few pieces available, most of which I've used here. So once more, you'll have to tolerate my somewhat unaccompanied voice. While the cards of Hektor have fanciful tales about how the blood of giants flows through their veins, they would not be so quick to boast of such things if they ever encountered a real one. Indeed, the giants share more features with the troll bloods than any human would consider comfortable knowing. Among mankind, only Professor Victor Pendrake, perhaps rather unsurprisingly, has had any direct encounter with a living giant, and it is through this giant's tales that much of what we know has been brought back to Western Immoren. However, Pendrake was already aware of the existence of the giants from a donation to the Department of Extraordinary Zoology at the University of Corvus, this donation being the remains of one giant called Kohlasa. Colossa was once buried in a holy Morrowind tomb, but was subjected to necromantic forces thanks to the pure malevolence that resulted from the defilement of the church below which his mausoleum lay. Though now on display, he is honoured once more as he should have remained, surrounded by holy sigils as befits the remains of a Knight of the Prophet. An outcast of his people, Kohlasa came to Corvus having fled his homeland in the east because of a dispute with his clan. Found to be of exceptionally mild demeanour, he impressed the people of the city with his strength and will, carving out the land that became the city's harbour with nothing but his bare hands. As he continued to reside in Corvus, he became a devout follower of Morrow and served as the city's faithful guardian before dying, protecting his new home and neighbours from a titanic painted tasselworm that he defeated with the last of his strength. Regrettably, such is his account, 50 years of life among the humans of Corvus, that it has gone by almost forgotten despite his uniqueness. A mere fable which would be laughed off as a child's fairy story were it not for his remains that may be readily viewed. As for other instances of giants in the Iron Kingdoms that Pendrake happened upon, it's not known whether Gorgolorbaramamiatt is related to the giants or not, and if he is, how. A strange mutant of stature equal to the giants, with the same distinctive thumb and two-fingered hands, this guardian giant was markedly different for having 6 eyes on his head and 1 in each of his palms, as well as being armoured in a style reminiscent of the Orgoth fashion. Thus, Pendrake's first true encounter with the living giant of Bemoth was with Chilon, when he ventured east and found himself among the Skorne. Hilon was a slave to these eastern Immories, captured by northern warbands who previously had unsuccessful encounters with giants, but managed to ambush Chilon and bring him to the empire's capital of Halark, where he remained as little more than a beast of burden. Thanks to many a long conversation with Pendrake, Hilon recounted much of his people's history, society, and legends. The fate of the giants as they are now, in the modern era, is inexorably linked to the dragons and the elves of Ios, though perhaps not in ways that we fully understand. The cataclysm that destroyed the Empire of Laios not only devastated central Immoren and the Iosan ancestors, but also the giants. While the elves and giants were not known to have come into conflicts that might have had any lasting effect on either of their peoples, they both evolved in much the same way. After the cataclysm, the elves enclosed themselves within the realm of Ios, while the giants coalesced in Bemoth, the last of their great cities, situated in the northeast of Immoren, in the shadow of the Sun-Eater Mountains to the north and the Grinding Teeth Mountains to the west. It lay separated from the Skorne realms by the valley of Cornash, which was sparsely populated except by scattered groups of Efarit and even more scattered groups of Skorne, due to the presence of the Shroudwall Mountains, which served as the natural northern frontier for the newly settled Skorne people. However, while the elves were still able to prosper, the giants were less fortunate, as they have forgotten just how long they have persisted while declining in numbers. Pendrake estimated that there are no more than a few hundred of them left, rendered on the verge of extinction by some unknown affliction that made many infertile and female births heartbreakingly rare. Effective immortality is no comfort to them, and more so is the case that they are one of the only races in Immoren capable of fighting dragons with any chance of defeating them, even if on still unequal terms. But the defeat of a dragon is something they have indeed accomplished. One of their greatest heroes is Hekor, whose legendary deeds date back to something along the lines of 2800 BR. Led by Hekor, the giants fought and vanquished Airdros, known as the Ocean Drinker, the Bale Blight, or, more pertinently to the giants, Bemoth's Curse. This dragon had been plaguing the giants for up to 3 millennia, as far back as when Torok first divided his heartstone to spawn his progeny. Thus it is understandably a legend without peer among the giants that they brought Airdros down. However, here Hekor's legend is tainted by tragedy, as the giants could never have known the true nature of a dragon's Athank. After almost countless attempts to destroy it, Airdros' Athank was finally cleaved in two by Hekor at the cost of his sword. Ignorant of what its consequences might be, the giants threw the Athank fragments into a volcano, from which were born Charsaug and Ashnefos. Though the destruction these new dragons wrought was terrible, Hekor marshalled the giants' defences and remained a stolid bulwark against this new threat. And despite earning the title of Champion of Bemoth, Hekor cuts a tragic figure, armed with sword and peeler, clad in worn, splintered armour and bearing his plain round shield. Thus equipped, Hekor has, for 3,500 years or so, stoically and diligently led the defence of his people, not only against the draconic threats posed by the twins, but also against the great Chimera, a morphing beast of shared draconic origin whose Athank was irreparably damaged by the cataclysm. It is thus fortunate for him that he is loyally aided by his brother-in-arms, Ajaxus. Whether or not Ajaxus and Hekor are indeed blood brothers or instead oath-sworn brothers, we may never be sure owing to our general ignorance of giant culture's more intimate details and their lingual nuances. Nevertheless, these two giants aid each other as their relationship would suggest, not only through respect and trust, but necessity. Where these two lead, the giants will follow. But while Hekor is the giants' champion, it is Ajaxus who is their lord and king. He is also their chief priest, the chosen representative on Cain of their god Monloeth, the masked giant above the mountains. In giant lore, Monloeth was first recorded battling a great serpent, and the peaks of the volcanoes through which their conflict passed cut open his feet for 50 steps. The blood that issued from his wounds spilled onto the earth below, where, blessed and cared for by the Earth Mother, Shebes, it became the first 50 giants. Their mythical name of Hekatonkeres has been passed down to Ajaxus as a title of honour and respect. This marks a great deal of commonality with the creation myths of humanity and other races of Immoren who worship Menoth, Dunia, and the Devourer Worm. However, the giants firmly believe that the Great Serpent is the ultimate creator of the dragons, something unconfirmed among human theologians and scholars. No matter how their beliefs may coincide with those of the Western Immorese, though, Ajaxus stands side by side with Hekor, his only purpose and desire being to protect his people. But having done so for so many millennia, he has become a tempestuous individual, the subject of his followers' love and fear. But as the chief priest of the giants, where he goes, he is accompanied by a retinue who ensure his safety, even though he is adamant in sharing the perils that face his people in battle. Separate from their leaders, the giants have their more solitary heroes too, those who prefer direct action because of their unquenchable hatred towards the dragons that remain a threat after so many years. One such hero is Oulixes, a tracker and hunter of incomparable renown among the giants. When Airdros was defeated, Oulixes retrieved a tooth from the fallen foe, crafting it into a spearhead that he uses on his hunts even now, complementing a keen and remarkable bow, also of his own making. He is driven by vengeance, for his village was destroyed by Ashnefos when he arose from the remains of his progenitor Airdros. To better hunt his draconic nemesis, Oulixes learned every peak, every valley, and every contour of the Sun-Eater Mountains, able to take advantage of the shadows and the light to come and go undetected by the other creatures of the slopes. No individual living creature appears to have quite the ability, or even willingness, however eager, to hunt the dragons as him. Like Hekor and Ajaxus, Oulixes is counted by Hilon as one among a select group of giants who possess what he calls the blessings of Shebes. As for Hilon himself, he does not regard himself as a hero in the least. Rather, like his counterpart Pendrake, he is a scholar, but also an archaeologist. He was studying the lost cities of the Empire of Laos and the many ruins of eastern Immoren when he was captured a little north of the Shroudwall Mountains, possibly in the southern parts of Skilfilar, in possibly the only recorded victorious encounter the Skorne has had with the giants. In Chilon, we learn of the diversity of giant culture. but also their great intellect. When Pendrake first sought to speak with Hilon, the giant impressed the human by attempting to communicate in a multitude of languages that Pendrake, of all people, did not understand or even know existed. Shockingly, they settled on Sheer, the language of the Iosans, mixed with the Skorne language when Pendrake was sufficiently fluent in it. It is from this and the lack of elven lore on conflict with the giants that we can reasonably gather that the elves of Laos and the giants had no lasting enmities, if any enmities at all. But generations of Iosans have lived and died while many of the same giants of those ancient days persist, so it should come as little surprise to any that the language of the giants is unknown to all but themselves. Nonetheless, Hilon is an example of the studious professor, better suited to the lecture hall or archaeological ruins, who prefers his research over the company of his peers. He nonetheless displays the characteristic giant stubbornness and resilience, for try as they might, the Skorne cannot tempt, goad or coerce Hilon to serve them in war, and it is well for all that he does not take up arms. In aggregate, his stories and anecdotes to Pendrake tell of a besieged people doomed to destruction, and while the blessings of Shibes imbue great power and magic to their heroes, there is only so much that they can do to protect those they fight for and alongside. These blessings reflect the heart of each giant, manifesting in what is required from them most, such that they are clearly supernatural, even for such a race as the giants. Ajaxus possesses divine magic with power over stone and earth. Hekor becomes an irresistible force in battle with sword, shield, and javelin, while Oulixes can channel his hatred of dragonkind to become a peerless ambusher, his every attack piercing all that they touch. But this is not to say that those without such blessings are easy pickings for an intrepid monster hunter. Even Hilon, though no fighter, is a creature of great strength, courage, and endurance despite his indentured servitude. Giants, without exception, are 3 to 4 times the height of a normal human, and almost immune to lasting injuries in the same manner as the Trollbloods, able to swiftly and fully recover from the loss of a limb with little apparent cost. Similarly, they are unaffected by many magics that would be debilitating to smaller denizens of Immoren. And even though they themselves have no idea about their own life expectancies, they are as immortal as the gods as far as humans are concerned. Hekor himself is the better part of 6,000 years old, and the others are of comparable age. Chilon, too, has no indication, however vague, of his own age, this being a seemingly alien concept to giant in general. Despite this, and perhaps because of it, the lack of young giants is a source of great concern to them, and the consequence is an overprotectiveness that borders on paranoia about the safety of Bemoth, their home, and the people within. And thus, like their former elven neighbours, the giants do not take kindly to uninvited visitors, killing any and all who stray too close to Bemoth. And also, like their former elven neighbours, their efforts may eventually all be for nothing. One must wonder, then, at what Immoren would look like if they could, by some miracle, recover their numbers and venture abroad.